I was sitting at a conference table in my attorney's office, 32 weeks pregnant, watching my husband slide a manila folder across the polished wood like he was passing me a dinner menu, not ending our marriage. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My back ached. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. And the man I had built my entire adult life around was sitting 6 feet away from me, looking at the wall just past my left shoulder, like he couldn't bring himself to actually look at me. "The terms are straightforward," his attorney said. "We're hoping to keep this amicable." Amicable. I remember thinking that was a strange word for what was happening. My name is Simone. I'm 34 years old. And on the morning my husband asked me to sign divorce papers while I was carrying our son, I thought the worst moment of my life had already arrived. I was wrong. Because 2 hours later, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Chicago, my brother-in-law walked through the door holding a flash drive, and everything my husband thought he'd buried came out into the open. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. My husband and I met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue in Naperville. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. I was finishing my master's degree in occupational therapy. He was 3 years into running the logistics side of his family's manufacturing company. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, got married at a small vineyard in the Wisconsin Dells with 40 people and a jazz trio his mother hated, and spent the next 6 years building something that felt, at least from where I was standing, like a genuinely good life. We bought a house in Elmhurst, a yellow house with a porch swing and a maple tree in the backyard that turned the most extraordinary color every October. I decorated the nursery in soft sage green. We'd already picked out the name. I had no idea anything was wrong until February, when everything changed in the space of about 3 weeks. It started small. He stopped coming to bed at the same time. He started taking calls in the garage and coming back inside with this tight, controlled expression I'd never seen on him before. Once, I came downstairs at 2 in the morning for a glass of water and found him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. And when I put my hand on his shoulder, he flinched like I'd startled him. "Just work stuff," he said. "Go back to sleep." I asked him what was going on at least a dozen times over the following weeks. Every single time, he gave me some version of the same non-answer. Supply chain issues. A contract dispute. Nothing I needed to worry about. I was 7 months pregnant. I was tired and swollen, and I had enough to think about already. And I told myself that was why I didn't push harder. That was what I told myself. Then one night in March, he sat down across from me at the dining room table and said, "I need to talk to you about something." I thought he was going to tell me he was sick. That was the first place my mind went. I thought he had gotten some terrible diagnosis and been sitting on it for weeks and was finally ready to tell me. Instead, he said, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I don't think our marriage is working anymore." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain simply refused to process the sentence the first time it went through. "What?" I said. He didn't repeat it. He just sat there. "You're telling me this now," I said. "Right now. While I'm pregnant. I know the timing isn't. Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't tell me you know." He'd already contacted an attorney. The papers weren't ready yet, but they would be soon. He wanted to keep things civil. He'd make sure I was taken care of financially. The house could go to me. He'd already figured out a fair custody arrangement. I sat at that table for a long time after he went upstairs. I remember the refrigerator making that low humming sound. I remember the nursery mobile I'd left on the counter because I hadn't finished hanging it yet. Little wooden stars. For weeks after that, I ran through every possibility I could think of. I checked his phone once when he left it on the counter. I'm not proud of that, but I did it. I asked our mutual friends carefully worded questions. I called his best friend from college, who told me he genuinely didn't know anything and sounded like he meant it. I watched my husband from across our own house, like he was a stranger who'd moved in. No affair that I could find. No gambling. no secret second life. Nothing that made any sense. He just kept saying the same thing. The marriage wasn't working. He needed out. He was sorry. And so there I was, 2 months later, 32 weeks along, sitting in a leather chair in a law office on a Tuesday morning, looking at my name printed on a set of divorce papers, wondering how I had gotten here. My attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s, who had clearly seen every version of this situation, was reviewing the asset division clause and asking me a question I wasn't processing. The words were coming through like they were underwater. Across the table, my husband sat with his hands folded. His attorney was pointing at something on page 3. My husband nodded like he was in a board meeting. Like this was a routine transaction. Simone. My attorney touched my arm. Do you want to take a short break? I shook my head. I wanted to get it over with. I pulled the folder toward me. I found the signature line. I picked up the pen. And that was when the door opened. Nobody knocked. It just opened. And my husband's younger brother stepped into the room. I had always liked him. He was 6 years younger than my husband. Lanky and a little awkward. The kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and always showed up early to help set up for family gatherings. He worked in the company's accounting department. He'd been the one to give the most sincere toast at our wedding. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt was rumpled. He was holding a laptop bag against his chest with both arms, the way you'd hold something you were afraid of dropping. My husband stood up so fast. His chair scraped back. What are you doing here? His brother looked at him and said, quietly and very clearly, I know what she did. The room went completely still. My husband's attorney started to say something about this being a private proceeding. My husband's face had done something I couldn't quite read. Not surprise exactly, but something closer to dread. Sit down, my husband said. His voice was low. This isn't the place. You're about to sign divorce papers, his brother said. I think this is exactly the place. He set the laptop bag on the table, pulled out the laptop, and opened it. Then he reached into the front pocket of the bag and placed a flash drive on the table. I found it 3 days ago, he said. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. I couldn't let this happen without at least showing you. My husband's attorney objected again. My own attorney leaned forward with an expression I hadn't seen from her yet. Focused, alert, interested. What is on that drive? The attorney asked. His brother looked at me. Not at my husband. At me. The reason my brother has been acting this way for the last 4 months, he said. It wasn't his idea. Everything that came out in the next 40 minutes rearranged my understanding of the previous 4 months so completely that I actually had to sit with it for days afterward before I could hold it steadily in my mind. The family manufacturing company had 2 primary owners. My husband, who handled operations and logistics, and his mother, who had co-founded the company with her late husband 20 years earlier and still held a 40% stake and the title of VP of Finance. What his brother had discovered while running a routine audit that my mother-in-law had apparently not expected anyone to run was a pattern of financial transfers that didn't correspond to any legitimate business activity. Not small transfers, not accounting errors. Over the course of about 14 months, approximately $340,000 had been moved from the company's operating accounts into a series of LLCs that, on paper, appeared to be vendor relationships, but which, on closer examination, were shells, all of them traceables, with some effort, back to her. His brother walked through it methodically. The dates, the amounts, the account numbers. He'd put together a summary document and printed it in triplicate. He slid a copy to each attorney and placed one in front of me. I looked at the numbers without really seeing them. My husband had his eyes closed. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. The look on his face made it clear enough. He opened his eyes. He looked at me for the first time in what felt like months. Really looked at me, not at the wall beside me or the table between us. I found out in January, he said. I did the math in my head. January was before any of it started, before the late nights, before the garage phone calls, before he stopped sleeping. I confronted her, he said. She told me that if it became public, the company would be investigated. That the investigation would take months. That it would be in the news. That you would be dragged through all of it while you were pregnant. She said it was better to. He stopped. His jaw tightened. She said it was better to separate, to protect you from the fallout. She said she'd repay everything quietly if I just cooperated. I stared at him. She told me you'd be called as a witness because of the joint financial accounts we share. She said the investigators would pull your records, your medical records, your therapy records, everything. That the stress would be dangerous for you and for the baby. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds. But I was terrified and I believed her and I made the worst decision of my life. The room was very quiet. His brother said she also told him that if he didn't cooperate, she'd claim he was the one who'd authorized the transfers. She had documents that could be read that way. It wasn't an airtight case against him, but it was enough to make things complicated. Blackmail, my attorney said. Within the family. She leveraged her own son, his brother said. He sounded more tired than angry. She used the baby as a reason to push him toward divorce, because she knew that once they were legally separated, Simone couldn't be compelled to testify about joint accounts. She was protecting herself. That was all it was. I sat with that for a moment. My mother-in-law, who had hugged me at Thanksgiving, who had helped me register for the baby shower, who had called me the daughter she never had at our rehearsal dinner. Where is she now? My attorney asked. His brother said he had already sent copies of the documentation to an attorney who handled corporate fraud cases. She was aware that the audit had been completed. She had not been reachable by phone since yesterday afternoon. My husband put his face in his hands. I wanted to feel sorry for him in that moment. I also wanted to scream at him. Both things were true at the same time, and I didn't know what to do with either of them. So I just sat there holding the pen I'd almost signed my marriage away with, and tried to breathe through my nose the way my prenatal yoga instructor had taught me. I should have told you, my husband said. His voice was muffled behind his hands. I know that. There is no version of this where what I did was okay. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. You let me think you didn't want us anymore, I said. For 4 months, you let me think I had done something wrong. I spent 4 months trying to figure out what I had done. He looked up. His eyes were red. I know. That's not protecting me, I said. That's making a decision about my life without asking me. I know, he said again, and I think he meant it. But knowing doesn't undo 4 months. It doesn't undo the nights I sat in the nursery with the lights off, talking to a baby who couldn't hear me yet, trying to figure out how to do it alone. My attorney requested a formal postponement of the proceedings. Given the circumstances, the other attorney did not object. The documents were gathered up, and the folder that had held my signature line was slid back across the table and closed. We left separately. I rode the elevator down alone, my hand on my stomach, watching the floor numbers change. I didn't speak to my husband for 11 days. I stayed with my sister, who lived 20 minutes away in Oak Park, and who did not ask me a single question I wasn't ready to answer. She just made me food and let me use her bathtub, and watched reality television with me every night at 9 o'clock like we were teenagers again. I needed that time. I needed to be angry without anyone asking me to also be understanding. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted, separate from what I was supposed to want, or what would be easiest, or what made the best story. On day 11, my husband called. I answered. He didn't try to explain himself again. He just said, I want to earn back your trust. I don't expect you to make any decisions right now. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere, and I'll do whatever it takes. I told him I believed him. I also told him that was the beginning of a very long road, not the end of one. Our son was born 4 weeks later at Northwestern Memorial Hospital on a Tuesday evening, 7 pounds 11 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a remarkably loud opinion about being born. My husband was in the room. I'd asked him to be there. That felt like the right thing, separate from everything else. When the nurse put our son in his arms for the first time, my husband cried in a way I'd never seen him cry before. Not quietly. Really cried. And I didn't say anything. I just watched him hold our son and let that be what it was. The legal situation with my mother-in-law moved slowly, the way these things do. The corporate fraud attorney his brother had contacted spent weeks reviewing the documentation. She retained her own attorneys and disputed everything. There were depositions. There were counterclaims. At one point, she issued a statement through her attorney describing the whole thing as a misunderstanding between family members regarding bookkeeping practices, which, if you've ever met an accountant, you understand is not how $340,000 disappears. She was ultimately required to repay the misappropriated funds with interest, surrender her stake in the company, and enter into a structured settlement that included ongoing financial monitoring. No criminal charges were filed, partly due to the complexity of proving intent in a family business structure, and partly because my husband chose not to push for them. That was his decision to make. I didn't agree with it, and I told him so. But I also understood it. We did not invite her to our son's baptism. We started marriage counseling 6 weeks after he was born, when I was cleared to drive again, and our son had settled into something approximating a sleep schedule. We saw a therapist on Thursday evenings, a calm and measured man who had apparently helped a lot of couples through situations that were harder than ours, which was both comforting and slightly unnerving. The counseling helped. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but week by week. We started having conversations we'd never had before. About the way my husband had been raised to handle problems alone, to fix things quietly, to never let anyone see the cracks. About the way I had spent 4 months assuming the worst about myself instead of asking harder questions. About the way neither of us had known how to say, "I'm scared" to each other, and what that had cost us. Trust doesn't rebuild in a straight line. I want to be clear about that. There were nights when I would be lying in bed, listening to our son breathe on the monitor, and I would feel the anger come back all the way, hot and fresh, like it had never gone anywhere. There were moments when I looked at my husband and wondered if I would ever fully stop seeing the person who had sat across a conference table from me with a folder of divorce papers. But there were also other moments. Smaller ones. Him getting up at 3 a.m. for the feeding without being asked. The way he started saying, "I don't know," when he didn't know something, instead of answering like he did. A Tuesday afternoon when it was raining and we were both home, and he made us grilled cheese sandwiches, and we ate them standing at the kitchen counter, not talking about anything important. And it felt, briefly, quietly, like ourselves again. His brother became a much larger presence in our lives after everything came out. He'd carried that flash drive around for 3 days before deciding to walk into that conference room, and I've thought about that a lot. 3 days of knowing, of weighing what it would cost, of deciding anyway. I told him once that I didn't know how to thank him. He said he couldn't have lived with himself if he hadn't done it. I believe that's true. I still think about that conference table sometimes. The pen in my hand, the signature line, the way the room had felt like it was shrinking. And I think about what changed and what didn't. My marriage didn't survive because of a dramatic moment. It survived because of what came after. The hard, unglamorous work of 2 people deciding they still wanted to try. Some days that felt like enough. Some days it barely felt possible. But it was ours. That part never changed. My son is 8 months old now. He has learned to pull himself up against the edge of the coffee table and then look around with an expression of profound personal satisfaction, like he's just summited something. He has 2 teeth. He thinks the dog across the street is the funniest thing that has ever existed. Sometimes I watch him and I think about the version of this story where I signed those papers, where I walked out of that building not knowing what I know now, where my son grew up with parents who lived in separate houses because his grandmother decided her balance sheet was more important than his family. I don't let myself stay in that version of the story for very long. But I visited enough to remember what almost happened. And I visited enough to remember what my brother-in-law chose when he could have chosen differently. That's the thing nobody tells you about the worst moments of your life. They're rarely just one moment. There are 100 small choices made by people you thought you knew. Some that almost destroy you, and some that quietly, stubbornly refuse to let that happen.